All right, awesome. So let's get started. Thank you, everybody who is joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Caitlin Barnard, and I lead our developer and community marketing here at Kong. I am also joined by Kevin, who is our developer advocate, and as you might have heard us talking about, he's representing us out of Taiwan right now. So I'd like to welcome you all to May's online meetup. I know it's been quite a while since we've seen you all. We ended up not doing this last month because we had our big virtual event, Destination Decentralization, which I hope some of you were able to attend. And as you all know, a lot has really changed over these last few months. So I'm really excited to have Melissa Hecht today join us, who is our product manager at Kong, and who's going to be talking about really the role of API gateways and how the distributed world is evolving and some of the similarities that we're seeing in our everyday lives as many of us have moved to working from home. Owen. So with that, I will hand it over to Melissa to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Caitlin. It is such an honor to be here. Let me share my screen. Great. You all able to see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. This is not a talk about working from home. I'm just going to start off with that. So as Caitlin said, I'm Melissa. I'm part of the product team at Kong, and I am based in the UK. And for us, we're on month 300 of the lockdown, is personally how I'm feeling. Interestingly, last time we did this talk, we were only about 4 weeks into the lockdown here, and I was very much in that enthusiastic, oh, I'm going to make loads of banana breads and clean my flats kind of attitude. Caitlin, you probably remember. I've moved on from that phase now, and I was saying to the guys just before we started that most of my free time I now spend looking at remote mountain lodges on the internet, just because I've got a desperate physical yearning to just get away from the city, from London right now. But the impact of the lockdown has been really different for all of us. And I think even though it's been a few weeks now, we're all still trying to figure out how to adapt really to our new lifestyles and to our new routines, whether that's home or work routines. With work, most of us have been working from home for a few weeks, whether we like it or not. And we have all, and I think we are all still experiencing some challenges as we figure out how to do it productively. And in some cases, like at Kong, how to do it productively across so many different time zones as well. The processes that supported us well as a centralized workforce, all under the same roof, don't all scale well to support us as a decentralized workforce. And it occurred to me a few weeks ago when I was preparing a talk, or this talk, for our event last month, that these challenges is actually very true for our architectures as we decentralize those. So in this session, we'll have a look at some of the challenges and some of the solutions of decentralizing our people and decentralizing our APIs and services. So as I said, and I think if anybody's got an idea for a better title, I would love to hear it at the end. And when we're allowed to travel, I'll buy you a coffee or a beer to say thanks, because I would personally rate my title 6 out of 10 at the moment. Let's go back in time a few weeks. How did you feel on your first day working from home? Some of you might find working from home is quite positive. I do, actually, for the most part. But for some people, it can be a really big challenge. And for me, this is how I felt on my first day. As colleagues, nobody really shared the same space anymore. I couldn't see anybody in front of me. I couldn't see anybody behind me or in any direction. And in fact, unless I'd already met my colleagues already in person, I didn't even know who they were. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know what they did. And now this poses us with some challenges. If you want to have a conversation with someone, you can't just walk over to their desk anymore, tap them on the shoulder, hey Colin, how are you doing? And if you need someone's input on something and you don't know where to find them, how much is this delay going to slow you down getting your job done? Now that you can't see everybody in the same place, how can we make sure that everyone is still visible and discoverable? Well, we find our colleagues in some kind of directory. Slack, for example, we use very heavily at Kong. Email as well. everyone you work with, you should be able to find them in one place, regardless of which team or which time zone they're in. Now picture this. It's not colleagues, but it's APIs and services. You've got hundreds or thousands of APIs all deployed in different places. You can't see them all in front of you. They're not under the same roof anymore. How can you find them now? How do you make them all discoverable and visible, but still in a consistent and in a controlled way? Well, we put all of our services in a catalog, much like an employee directory. Our catalog needs to show the endpoints of each service, some information or documentation that helps you identify the service and what it does. It needs to be permissions based so that you can make the right services discoverable to the right people at the right times. And it needs to have a single shop front so you know where to start looking. Like, you always open up Slack in the same way and start a direct message with somebody in the same way. Cool. So we've done the Panda. We now have a way to make our services and ourselves visible to our colleagues. But how do we now we can find each other? How do we actually communicate and work together, since we can't just sit in the same meeting room anymore? Or sit in the same meeting room and brainstorm over the same whiteboard, which I personally still struggle with. We find new ways of communicating using video conferencing, for example, to link us together when we're in all of these different locations, like we're all on Zoom at the moment. But as more and more of us adopt these tools, we're pushing them to limits that they never expected to have to scale to so quickly. Anybody listening, have you ever had any issues with Zoom the last couple of weeks, the last couple of months actually? Zoom is now hosting over 300 million daily meeting participants. That's gone up. 4 weeks ago, that was 200 million. In December, that was 10 million. But it's not just the applications that are under strain, it's the underlying infrastructure that powers it as well. And we're seeing some global digital services start to have to manage the amount of traffic that they're sending to ensure that there's still enough overall network resource for us to all do the other things that we need to do. In Europe, for example, Netflix have reduced their bitrate here so that they can reduce the amount of internet traffic they consume by 25%. And as we get more and more decentralized, this reliability of our network becomes even more critical. How many times have you been on a video call recently where someone's turned into a robot? Can be quite funny, but it's also incredibly frustrating. It's disruptive. It makes your meetings unproductive whilst that's happening. So the first thing that we really need is a reliable way to communicate. The problem has shifted now from having the physical space to hold us all together in one place to having the reliability of the network that connects us between all of these different locations. And for our distributed services, this means we need to implement traffic management, a bit like I said that Netflix have. For example, we need to have load balancing across different instances of our services so that we can make smart routing decisions rather than always routing messages to the same node and overloading it. Like how at Kong we've got a support team rather than one individual that has to deal with every single support case. We need to adopt patterns like circuit breaking so that rather than continuing to send a message if it's down or if we've overloaded it and then getting outages, we use patterns like this to build in resilience. And of course, we don't want a single point of failure anywhere in our chain and in our stack. So we need these traffic management tools themselves to be reliable and scalable. For this, we need an API gateway or an ingress controller to manage our north-south traffic. And we may also want to look at a service mesh to manage our east-west traffic as we decentralize more and do more direct service-to-service communication. But that's not all. This is part one. Those of you with a Mac, how hard do you find it sometimes to run Skype? How can you create a Google Hangout unless you have a Google account? I'm having more and more Zoom calls, or I'm setting up more and more Zoom calls, and people will reply back, oh, we're not allowed to use Zoom at all at the moment. So some people are using personal laptops. I've got, I think, 5 different video conferencing systems currently running on my laptop. By the way, I'm not digging Zoom out here. It's my personal favorite of all the video conferencing tools. I'm just using it as an example. But whichever tool you use, how much time is wasted at the beginning of your meetings at the moment while people install or start up the video conferencing tool, or find that, you know, they haven't connected to the audio properly, I can't turn the camera on. How much is this wasted time costing you? The way things are today, we all need to have installed and know how to use loads of different video conferencing platforms. Whereas really what we want is a platform agnostic way for us to all communicate together. One tool that's easy for anyone to run, regardless of where they are or what equipment they're using. And the same needs to be true for our distributed services and our APIs. This communication fabric that connects them all together also needs to be platform agnostic. This is especially important now as we're moving from one centralized technology stack, one that typically you tend to have full visibility and control over, to distributed technology stacks running different technologies and controlled or managed by different people. It's just not going to scale if you can't communicate between these environments. Now, the third and the final requirement that we have for communicating effectively with our distributed colleagues is being able to use the right method for whatever it is that we're trying to say, whatever the message is that we're trying to get across. For example, we've got lots of different types of video calls. In one-to-ones with your manager, you'll keep your video on, your sound on, so that you can have a real-time two-way conversation. But company-wide all hands or meetups like this, and certainly for this beginning part, tends to be much more of a one-way broadcast or stream of information that you subscribe and that you listen to. And obviously, not everything is a video call, not everything is real time. After a meeting, for example, especially one in which you make decisions, you'll typically have an asynchronous push of information as someone sends out the minutes. You don't need to reply to it really, you don't need to act on it immediately, but you need it there for future reference. And sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. Sometimes a Giphy is worth 1,000 more. Anybody else totally overused Giphy integration in Slack? I'm very guilty of this. It is one simple little interface that lets me query and generate any kind of GIF that I need, just to bring a bit of a smile to the chat. But as much as I love it, I do recognize that sadly, we not really get that much done if Giphy was the only way that we communicated. The only way that we can communicate effectively across our organizations and between our organizations is to support a whole load of different communication protocols at the same time. And again, the same is true for our services. We can't force everything to be sent or received in the same way. Instead, our connectivity fabric needs to support multiple different communication protocols. The most common of which we know, request response through REST, event streams like Kafka, queryable interfaces with GraphQL, for example. So we've had a look now at how we make ourselves and our services visible. We've had a look at the key requirements that we need to meet to enable communication between us. Let's talk about a very big topic next, security. I mentioned Zoom a minute ago. Anyone been Zoom bombed? I'm hearing it quite shockingly in the news fairly often, the things that are happening. And even if you haven't been, have you changed how you use Zoom so that you don't expose yourself to this risk? Or another video conferencing tool here, just to clarify. It's not really a security threat that we as individuals or that our companies have had to consider before in this way. And it's also not one that Zoom themselves have really had to invest much in either until now. But to be fair to them, how were they supposed to know that they were going to get such a sudden spike in usage by new audiences using the services that they expose in new ways? The immediate thing to do in this specific case is password protect our Zoom meetings, so only the authenticated users can join. Zoom have also released loads of security updates that support this. But this isn't enough to ensure that you can do your whole job securely and safely at home. What if you're using your personal laptop and you don't know about it, but you've got loads of malware running on it? What if you're running a really out-of-date version of your operating system? And for some people working in regulated industries, I've got some mates who work in finance. They're not allowed to use their personal laptops at all for any work-related stuff. So as soon as they started having to work from home, their companies had to very rapidly provision, ship out and deploy new equipment, send out new laptops for them to even just be able to do their jobs on. And then on all of our work laptops, we likely all have security software running in the background that our IT teams take care of for us. They'll ensure that our hard drives are encrypted and that we're running up-to-date versions of our apps, for example. But it's not just the hardware and the software we use, though, that needs to be secure. It's also the processes that we do as individuals. So it's the hardware, the software, and the processes. What's to stop you from writing down someone's credit card details in a notebook, leaving it in a pile on your kitchen table, forgetting about it, and then likely accidentally violating GDPR? When you get an email from your CEO asking you to follow a link and review a document for him or her, what's to stop you clicking on the link and accidentally downloading ransomware? Well, this comes down to training and testing. Each one of us as individuals need to know what good security practices look like. So when we carry out our day-to-day tasks, we know how to do them in the right way. And then this is backed up by company-wide phishing tests, for example, where your IT team will send out phishing emails or test phishing emails to see who clicks on the link. And the link will be harmless in this case, but it identifies the individuals who need a bit of extra education. It identifies the weaknesses that we may have in our ecosystem and our infrastructure. What we've actually just looked at here with these three things is really the need to apply security in multiple ways and places. And for our services, we can't just say, oh, I've applied a no-wolf policy to the endpoint, so it's now completely secure. I mean, yes, API security policies are one critical requirement, but our security strategy needs to encompass many other layers in the stack. For example, across our networks, confidential traffic should be encrypted. We've got VPNs and VPCs. Service-to-service communication between microservices should be protected with MTLS. Applications that consume our APIs and services should each have their own identity and a contract to use our services. The code that we write needs to go through code reviews from our peers. We should have an internal CVE process. We need to scan and pen test our products, and so on and so on. So we need to secure our decentralized services using multiple different methods, protecting every single layer of the stack. And we need to do this consistently across each of our distributed locations because we're only as strong as our weakest link. So across our entire distributed network, we can't have any weaknesses anywhere. It's becoming the norm now too that our security is intelligent. We don't just act when a DDoS attack has already brought things down, for example. Instead, our systems notice a spike in traffic, an unexpected spike in traffic. And although nothing's gone wrong yet, everything is still running, your systems need to warn you that, hey, something might be afoot. You might want to go and check out proactively whether this spike is important. Or maybe you've gotten an API request coming in and technically the body adheres to the schema that you've specified in your Swagger spec. But the characters that you're seeing in there don't usually happen. It's not a common set of characters to receive. Is it something dodgy that you want to go and look at before you actually start to process the message? So now we've got the right security measures in place and we've got our services up and running, they're communicating with each other. How do we now maintain all of these in all these different locations as we go forwards? One of the things that I think we're all finding difficult being stuck at home is keeping ourselves refreshed and updated. I mean, Who can tell, I won't tell on you, who can tell if you haven't had a shower today? Does anybody notice the fact that we can't cut the back of our own hair? We're all having to take new approaches now and rely on different things to take care of ourselves. And this also includes access to the resources that we need day to day, like the snacks and the drinks that keep us going. Although you might say it's a good thing not having an unlimited supply of chocolate in your new office location, I do. Sales of coffee machines as well in the UK have actually gone up by 167% in the UK recently. And it's not just that, the way that we get our coffee has changed. We don't wait for a group of colleagues to all be free in the office at the same time and then go out as a group to get some more coffee and get our caffeine hit. Instead, we all just get a coffee individually at home whenever we ourselves need one. How does this translate to our distributed architectures? Like the new hairstyles that we're sporting, the approach that we take to operations is changing. Here we need some kind of orchestration platform so that we can keep each of our services up to date, so that you can apply patches, so that you can independently scale out a service to match demand, rather than scaling out a whole group of them at the same time. And as well as keeping ourselves up to date, we also need ways to just check in with everybody, whether synchronously or asynchronously. In our team at Kong, for example, we've got 15-minute check-ins every other day just to make sure that everyone's okay. We've got our regular one-to-ones still with our managers where we can go more in depth. And we've also got weekly anonymous company-wide surveys where it's very simple. You asynchronously just say on a scale of 1 to 10 how you're feeling that day. So it's just a way to get a pulse on the overall distributed people. And we need all of this for our services as well. We need to know that they're there. We need to know that they're healthy. We need to know what they're doing. So we need the monitoring and the logging tools to support our distributed estate as well. All right, let's have a look at something else then for a minute. Speed is one of the biggest drivers for people to decentralize their architectures in the first place. But as things get more and more decentralized, it can also be one of the biggest challenges. Think about it this way. How much time, before you started working from home, how much time did you used to have to spend commuting into work? And then once you got into the office, how often would you be distracted by the people around you? It's obviously very different for everybody at the moment because we've all got different living situations. But one upside of working from home like this can just be this extra time and extra productivity that we can have. And these gains apply to our services as well. They're not sharing resources anymore. They're not all having to get coffee all together at the same time and wait for everyone else to be free. These services aren't being interrupted. They're not being slowed down by other processes because they're not sharing any of that same infrastructure with each other anymore. But we don't just get better performance as a result of distributing our services, though. We have to be very intentional about how we distribute them and how we connect them. We need to architect with performance in mind. The more distributed everything is, the more network boundaries our messages need to cross. And with every hop comes extra latency. And as I'm sure we've all heard Marco, our CTO, say many times, slow is the new down. So we've looked at the coordination and the communication between services a few minutes ago. That's vital here. It needs to be fast. It needs to be optimized. There should be no unnecessary detours for your messages. We need to think about the orchestration between these services. If any one of your individual services responds slowly, then the overall response is going to be slow, right? If your API gateway or your monitoring tool adds latency to each service, then this is going to be multiplied by the number of services. If every request to every individual service has to be routed or rerouted through a central point, this will create a bottleneck that'll slow everything down as well. So we need to take a different approach to design than before. We need to ensure that all the tooling that's touched during any request can perform sufficiently well. And we need to ensure that it's not just our service implementations that we decentralize, but it's this infrastructure tooling as well where we can. So we're running that in multiple locations to reduce latency as well. Let's also not forget alerting. It will happen. You will get slow response times sometimes. So when it does, you need to know about it so that you can act on it quickly and prevent it from continuing on. Really then, the aim here is to optimize our architecture, optimize the technology that we use, and also optimize our processes. And part of this comes down to the governance. Day-to-day life has changed quite considerably for everybody in the last few months. And I think one of the most noticeable things is that we all used to follow roughly the same Monday to Friday routine, whereas there's so much more disparity now in terms of how we get our jobs done. For example, I was speaking to Kevin just before we started off this call, and his routine now is to get up at random times of day, work until it's coming up to what, 2 a.m. for you now, Kevin? People can't work the same hours as before and work the same hours as everybody else now. Perhaps you're looking after your children during the day, so you try and use some evenings for work. Perhaps you're a local responder in your community and you need to pause your work intermittently to go and help out. Depending on who we are and our own circumstances, our routines have adapted differently. And it's actually been necessary to be so different from each other now, because trying to force all of our old routines into our individual new lifestyles just wouldn't have worked for us in a lot of cases. But it's important to note here that we've not really changed what we do. We've just diversified the ways in which we do it so that we're fitting in things as efficiently as possible. This doesn't mean that we've stopped following company guidelines. Of course we are. We're just applying them differently now. For example, at Kong, we've said we need to write more memos and we need to document more key conversations in Confluence so that they can be referenced later on by people elsewhere who might not be online at the same time. Really, what I'm saying here is that our services need to be built in a range of different technologies. And as we distribute our services, our teams need to be empowered to use whichever tool is right for the job, rather than forcing everybody to do the same thing in the same way. But we do still need our best practices to be defined and shared so that each of these different teams can still do the right thing. For example, making sure that every API and service is documented and discoverable in a catalog. But the way in which this best practice is enforced needs to be decentralized as well, rather than having one central point of control, which actually then just becomes a bottleneck and slows things down. Your governance models need to become more federated as well. So the culture shifts to one where you've got more empowered local teams, each set up to do their own thing in their own way, but with the best practices enforced through DevOps and automation. And I mean things like CI/CD processes, making sure that everything is tested consistently and in the right way before it's promoted to a different environment or deployed somewhere. Or reporting telling you which of your APIs are missing Swagger specs in a catalog, for example. And in fact, as we get more and more decentralized, doing our governance through automation becomes even more necessary. All right, I'm aware that I could keep talking about this forever, but let's have a look back at what we've covered in the last 20 odd minutes. There are a few key considerations that we need to have as we decentralize our architectures. There's technology that we either need to adopt that we don't already have, or there's technology that we need to use a little bit differently to support us going forwards in the new normal. Firstly, to make all of our services discoverable and usable, they need to be documented in a service catalog. as we decentralize our services, the importance of managing and governing the network traffic grows. So we need an API gateway and possibly a service mesh, and we need to support multiple different communication protocols. We need to have a multi-layered approach to security. We need an orchestration platform and consistent monitoring tooling so that we can understand and control every part of our distributed estate. The way that we design our services and our applications will probably change as well, so that they're optimized for performance and minimal latency. And we also need to embed new governance processes, if we're not already, like CI/CD. Change is hard. I'm very aware. I can write things in a list and say, hey, we need to do this, easy peasy. Change is hard. We know this, and we're not going to be successful doing this overnight. I mean, we're all still learning how best to work from home. I work from home full time as part of Kong, and I've been doing it for a year, and I'm still figuring out how to do it as best as I can. But by using the right tools and by following the right processes, we can achieve great outcomes. And these outcomes are the most common drivers for decentralization in the first place. I'm hoping that these outcomes don't just apply to our APIs and our services, though. I'm hoping we can see these benefits as people and as organizations as a result of having to work from home like this. Being set up as employees to work from any location, not just our homes, not just the office, but from anywhere, can actually make us more scalable as a workforce. Are you finding it difficult, for example, to recruit people for a certain location? Maybe that barrier doesn't always have to exist anymore. I hope that we also recognize the importance of prioritizing our physical and our emotional well-being too, because this is so important for our resilience as people going forwards. And I honestly do believe that a lot of the pain that companies are going through right now, working out how to adopt work from home practices, is actually leading to processes being established that will make them more adaptable in the future. So with that, I'll finish and I'll say thank you so much for listening. It's been such a pleasure to share this meetup with everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm obviously going to stick around for a while, so open for questions, feedback, any other analogies that you want to add to this list. As I said, I'm looking for a new title, so any suggestions there, I also welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us today. I personally love this topic because it just makes me feel much more connected knowing that we're all facing and adjusting to both these, changes in our communication and technology-wise. So thank you again for that presentation. We have some time for questions. So if you have a question you'd like to ask, you are welcome to unmute yourself. We also have chat if you don't want to. Also would love to hear if you have been seeing any of these examples in your day-to-day as well.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving that presentation, Melissa. That was interesting. I was thinking about how all the different apps we use now, we're big on Teams now all of a sudden. So we use like WebEx internally, and now we're shifting to Microsoft Teams. Mm-hmm. And we use like a CA Flow Doc, a little bit of Slack, but mostly CA still because they're kind of one of our biggest vendors. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so many different chat apps out there, and just the difference from working from home a lot too now. I've noticed I need to get a better work from home chair. Like my chair is terrible. I feel myself scrunching back and forth all day long because I'm just not used to it. Yeah.
It makes a really big difference. It's lovely to see you again, Jeremy. It's been months.
Yeah, it's been a while since the last Kong Summit.
Yeah.
Good to see you on the community call.
It's a pleasure to be here. I love how everybody's taking the video conference best practices. They're doing it properly and everybody's on mute.
Yeah, on this call it seems like that. On my work calls, I always hear somebody munching on a bag of chips or an apple or something when you get like 30 plus people in a conference call. Yeah.
What I have been enjoying is meeting so many people's pets.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, for some of the virtual events I've been working on, we have been considering doing breakout sessions where you get to introduce either your pets or your children. Because normally, you know, you don't have those in the office.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I read something like the adoption rate for pets now at all the, you know, centers where you can go get one has just skyrocketed during this quarantine time, because everyone's like, man, I got no one around now. I got to get a dog or a cat or something to keep me entertained.
We tried. I've been wanting to foster for a long time, and we tried to get on the list, and you cannot get a foster right now where I'm at because
Wow.
it's so
Yeah.
popular.
Uh-huh. It's wild. I hope people, even when they go back to work, they'll still take care of those pets though. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my concern. Like
Uh-huh.
my setup now would be perfect for looking after a dog, and I've always wanted one. But as soon as we can travel again, I'm going to be gone.
Yeah. Lifestyle shifts again completely. Yeah. So,
Anyone have a nice mountain lodge anywhere that's worth me looking at?
Awesome. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I think we can close it out for today. So thank you again, Melissa, for that presentation. We have our next call on June 9th, so I hope to see you all there. So have a great day, everyone.
take care.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.